سلام. أرحب بكل الحاضرين معنا هنا ومن انضم لنا
and those who joined via Zoom and Facebook. I would like to remind you that you can take part through your questions under Q&A, and we will be responding to them on time. And we would also give you the chance here to ask your questions in the panel discussion, actually in the final 15 minutes of the session. No need to remind you of the ARIJ Code of Conduct. We respect all the opinions and the other opinions, and we give you the floor to express your opinions, but you have to have respect, of course, and never to insult any other person or opinion, to produce effective investigative reports that narrate or tell the story with its different angles. It is important today to produce investigative reports, cross-border investigative reports. However, this also applies to the community of fact-checkers. And the benefit would be to everyone, because cross-border investigations are naturally provide you with better sources and resources to introduce you to different expertise and to go beyond the language barrier and to understand the context in a better manner. A few minutes ago, there was a session whereby Dr. Ruba Zaidan said something very important. I would use it as a quote. I would like to quote, cross-border collaboration today is capable of saving or rescuing the human being and our humanity. However, there are still some challenges and lessons learned that we can learn from those who had the experience of the cross-border collaboration. To start, my dear audience, let's speak about specialized issues. There's a lot of information in cases on environment and climate. Only a few days ago, a group of Arabic language fact-checkers and others in Europe talked about through cross-border collaboration to expose some misleading information. We have Hadil Al-Hadari. Hadil Al-Hadari, she's an investigative reporter from Egypt. She specialized in climate and environment. She has Hadouta or story platform. She speaks about the climate. She addresses climate issues. We have Alexei Chemovics. Also, he's an anthropologist and he's specialized in the media. He's a philosopher and a coordinator and analyst in one of the projects of the IFCN, Climate Misinformation Project. I'm inviting them to the stage, please.
Okay, I should have this and this.
Yes, you can.
Okay, so yeah, firstly, thank you for this opportunity to being here, to join engage and engage in the climate disinformation COP28 lab. So working in an international team is enriching due to the new perspectives it's obviously that it brings. And every day we force and face problems in our way, from our, perspective in our country and our region. For me, it's like the Europe. Poland, for you, is Egypt, the Middle East, Jordan, and, for example, Lebanon. So the effects are exactly the same. Global warming, drying up rivers, the problem of water availability, migration, and so on and so forth. The main cause, of course, is the human activity. That extraction and burning fossil fuels. So during the lab, we noted that regardless the country or the region, the false claims are not much different. They undermine the relevance of climate change or the need for the global agreements like COP28 or the Paris Agreement, for example. And this information hits individuals and activities that also involves for example, greenwashing or whitewashing image of companies or countries. So the question is why verifying information, why fact-checking, it's still important. And for me, it's because not everyone has these digital skills, digital knowledge or digital competence that as we have, as you, as journalists, as fact-checkers. And people on the internet perceived these posts, this information as something relevant, as something obvious, as something clear. And these false statements, for them, they are true. And of course, it delays the climate action and the climate transformation, the transformation and energy transformation, obviously. Moreover, climate change is a complex phenomenon, and it's not easy to make simple stories about it, to describe it in the simple way. So I think that the workshop was the first step to join forces, to join efforts, but not only with Arab or European fact checkers, but I think even globally or I don't know, on the bigger scale. And I think we see that there is a great need to unite our forces and act to reduce circulation of misinformation, of disinformation, of false claim on social media. And that it's really important that the false information they are still present in social media. And at the same time, the number of people using social media is still growing up. So let's try to join forces more often and figure out how to do it in the best way and build more bridges. I think so.
Thank you, Alexi. شكرا Alexi.
Thank you, Alexi. Alexi was one of the trainees in the European 2020, the Lab 28 that was organized by the AFCN. I'm really proud to have been a trainer in this fact-checking training regarding the climate change and also the COP28. I would be sharing information about the work of the lab COP28. It was on a number of stages. The first one was we offered training, online training for a number of fact-checkers on getting conclusions or trustworthy information, credible information about the climate change and trustworthy information to debunk the fake information and misleading claims regarding climate change. We also gave them offered a training on what's the COP28, what are the main files attached to it, the main cases or issues that we were discussing, also the main allegations regarding the climate change that is usually spread swiftly before the yearly or the annual conference on the climate change. All such claims rise. The other stage that we went through was that we started to help the young journalists or fact-checkers to be proactive, to try to look for stories to fact-check the false information regarding COP28. So we worked with them for more than a month to find to seek good stories in addressing them. The third and last one was COP28 lab that was held here in Jordan for 2 days. We worked two groups, the European and Arab groups. It was we came up with the best conclusion or result was the interaction and the communication between the two groups, not as opposed to each one working separately. So there was a big regardless, like Alexis said, regardless of your nationality or your country, there had been a lot of inclusion, a lot of communication and interaction. They started to help each other with the sources. We had a suggestion to do a database as a product of the workshop, so as everybody would add their own sources or tools for the rest to benefit from. We learned a lot from each other. Thank you, Farah.
طبعا شكرا لكم.
Thank you for both of you, and we'll get back to you again.
المتبقين أيضا معنا في خدمة البنتاغون
In the Pentagon, there was an investigation. There's an investigation that documents the violations against the migrant laborers. But these companies are still having millions for these companies. This investigation is one of many cross-border investigations that they worked on. Hoda Uthman and Andrew Lirin with another bunch of journalists to introduce is a investigative journalist. He's one of the senior editors at NBC News in investigative journalism, and he worked in so many projects that are transboundary. Hoda is well known. She's member of editors in ARIJ. She's also an investigative journalist and trained a lot of journalists for investigational journalism since 2008. Please join me on the stage.
شكرا يا فرح.
Thank you, Farah.
الصوت اوكي؟ حطوا لنا التايمر بس عشان not to go over.
Tell us at the time.
Thank you very much. I've worked with Andy on a number of collaborations, and we're going to be speaking about two stories. I'm going to be speaking about the most recent story that we did. We worked on two stories that were part of an ICIJ project called Trafficking Inc., and it's about labor trafficking practices. The story that we worked on this year, actually starting last year, it was about 11 months, was published in October, and it was about Amazon in Saudi Arabia, huge company, and workers who were working there and labor violations that were happening there. We focused on Nepali workers. We had interviews with over 50 Nepali workers, thanks to Pramod, who was a big part of the success for this investigation, a Nepali investigative reporter. And we found out through these interviews that there were lots of violations, starting with the workers paying for recruitment fees in Nepal, being told that they were going to work directly for Amazon, and then ending up when they land in Saudi Arabia, finding out that they have to work through a labor supply company, to accommodations. We had a lot of documentation, pictures and videos, accommodations that were really bad, not having often drinking water. And it goes as bad as being stuck in Saudi Arabia, not being able to leave the country. Even after they were fired, they had no income, and yet the company was asking them to pay money in order to be able to go back to Saudi Arabia. I'm going to talk about why the title of this session is how to build bridges. Yesterday we had one session that was focused about why investigations fall apart, and today we're going to talk about why investigations actually work. And I have to start by giving Andy a lot of credit. A lot of us, Arab journalists and Arab media organizations, when we work with Western organizations, sometimes we feel that the Western journalists come to us from a perspective of just wanting us to do the stuff that's related to like speaking Arabic or to access to sources. But from the start, from our first investigation, which Andy is going to be talking about, Andy treated us as equals. And we were involved in everything, all the interviews, even the ones that really did not require speaking Arabic and did not require having knowledge about the region. And I think that this made a lot of difference, and thank you, Andy, for working us in this way. Another thing is that all the people involved, and I have to mention some names here, Pramod, of course, also Tanka, who might be in the audience here today, our research team at ARIJ, Iman, and our intern, Mara. There was like a lot of chemistry between all the people involved in working on this investigation. There was, as we were talking yesterday, radical sharing. All the emails, all the spreadsheets, they were all shared by everyone at all times. There was also lots of flexibility. We had a lot of challenges because of the time difference with Nepal. We were filming there for 2 days, and we were both like up in the middle of the night following up the filming and adding questions and so on. In addition to that, we had if you've attended yesterday's session, we had a project manager. We had ICIJ and Mike Hudson, who I have to also thank and credit for the success of those stories, who was, there was a good balance between not being too strict that it stifles the investigation, but at the same time being there to back us and support us and mediate if there is a reason. So finally, as you can notice, like a lot of what I mentioned as reasons for the success have to do with people. I feel like the people were dedicated, they were hardworking, there was like good communication between all of us, and that's why I feel that it worked well.
It's great. Thank you, Hoda. Let me tell you a story. I teach, in addition to working at NBC News, I teach investigative reporting at a university in New York City, CUNY. And I was teaching investigative reporting to my graduate students, and I have them read documents. And one of my students, as part of that assignment, is named Molly Boygon, and she's reading a document, and it is titled, the Pentagon, essentially the title is, the Pentagon should do more to oversee contractors in its bases overseas. About as boring a title as you could imagine for a report. What does it even mean? So Molly did not even think it was worth pursuing, did not think it was worth a story. I said, trust me, this could be something. I want you to dig deeper. I want you to do these things. She started making more inquiries. And then what we realized is that these reporters had actually found, these auditors had actually found that there was trafficking going on at US military bases, but they wrote it in almost a bureaucratic, polite language. We're like, well, this is real news. Trafficking of workers at US military bases overseas. Now, you may not know, the US has 750 military bases around the world. Some of the biggest are here in the Middle East. So how do we begin doing this story? One of my first calls was to Hoda, Rowan, and everyone at ARIJ. We said, we think we may have something here, but it's got to be more than one boring document. We've got to make this come alive. We've got to name names. We've got to dig deeper. So we started working with a terrific team. Hoda, Khomeini, Youssef, Tanka, Rowan, so many other people at ARIJ started finding out more information on the ground. Meanwhile, back in America, Molly and I are starting to reach out to whistleblowers and develop a deep understanding. Notice at this point, I haven't even mentioned NBC News yet. They did not know about the story that we were developing at the university. Finally, in January, I have a meeting with my boss and also with Fergus at ICIJ. And I say to them, listen, you're not going to believe this, but I think we have a story about trafficking at a US military base. And Fergus said, well, we think we may have some information that may help. Perhaps, we can form a collaboration. That's what led to this collaboration with ICIJ, then with the Washington Post, NBC News, and ARIJ. We started developing the reporting, and we really stuck to the things that make good journalism. Documents, data, we're traveling on the ground, we're really understanding the law. One thing you need to understand about trafficking at US military bases, it's not like an inconvenience, it is against the law in the United States. It is illegal. So we start being able to name names of companies, dozens of companies trafficking workers, the workers that you see in the cafeteria lines giving the food to soldiers, the workers who are repairing and cleaning the military bases. So we're really developing a deep understanding of this. My colleagues, my boss at NBC News, Rich Greenberg, loved the story, approved it. I started working with our military correspondent, Courtney Kuby. Anna Schechter was another terrific colleague I worked with as we're developing this. Constant communication, like Hoda was saying. We were talking regularly. I'm sure she's sometimes sick of seeing a phone call coming from me. Being aware of security, looking at using Signal, trying to be aware of everyone's security needs, but always dedicated to telling this story in the biggest way possible. So finally, on October 27th of last year, we're all publishing in the Washington Post, on NBC News, on our digital platforms, in Arabic, in about 7 or 8 news sites in the MENA region. So important to be able to tell this story. This story did win a bunch of awards. It did get a lot of attention. It also led to investigations by the federal government into trafficking on these bases. So these stories can have impact. And I think all these ingredients are what make a good collaboration. Thank you.
شكرا أندرو، شكرا هدى.
Thank you, Andrew and Huda. Doctors from Syria were lost twice. At the first time when they were forced by war to migrate to other places. At that time, the number of doctors since 2010 until 2021 was reduced to more than half. And the second time when they arrived to Europe and they were banned by the migration policies from working in their own occupation. Lost hopes and lost energies. The investigation was worked by Lujane Hajoub. She was an investigative journalist from Syria. She's also a media trainer, and also Mark Hunter, who set the base for the investigative journalism in the road of truth, and also set the curriculum of investigative journalism that was being taught in so many universities. I call you up to the stage.
Hello. About 5 years ago, on one of my visits to Amman for ARIJ, I noticed an entire new neighborhood of Syrian businesses, a very rich-looking neighborhood. A year later, I went to Istanbul and saw another such neighborhood. And suddenly, it occurred to me that the image we have in Europe, where I live, of Syrian refugees was incomplete. That not only 800,000 hungry, cold, poor people with nothing but what they had on their backs had crossed the German border, but that a vast stream of capital, human capital, skill, money, had crossed the borders as well. And I talked to people about this story for a couple of years because I didn't see how I would ever be able to do it. And then I had lunch with Hoda in New York, and I said, Hoda, this is what I've seen. And she said, we can do this. And then Radio Rosanna came into the game, and for me, this was a dream, okay? I've known the people at Rosanna for 10 years. They have great characters, which matters a lot. They were people I wanted to know better and collaborate with, and I knew the story would be impossible without them. Next slide, please. So the major problem we faced was that nobody in the world had any idea how many doctors had left. We looked at other elites. We looked at manufacturers. We looked at people who had bakeries. We looked at people who make clothes. But we realized that finding those businesses would be a huge job that would be beyond anybody's capacity. So we thought of doctors. And then we discovered that nobody in the world could say how many doctors had left, or so it seemed. We heard estimates ranging from 30% up to 60%. So we began looking for the data. We had one starting point. In 2010, it was known that there were 30,000 doctors in Syria. So if we could figure out how many were left a number of years later, we could start to figure out how big the diaspora was. And we got lucky, okay? You tend to get lucky when you're looking. So we finally came across a United Nations database where it's called HERAMS. First time I heard that name, I had no idea what it meant. And the HERAMS database surveyed medical facilities in Syria. In exactly 1 year, 2020, they surveyed the ensemble of facilities in Syria. So then it was simply grade school arithmetic. We added up the doctors that they found and subtracted 30,000 from that number. And we realized that the highest estimate of the doctors who left Syria was low. Approximately 75% of Syria's doctors left the country, according to the data we had in front of us. Then I began trying to see if anyone had left references to these doctors in open sources on the internet. We found people who had talked about it in France, Canada, a couple of other countries, called them up, made a database of what they were telling us and putting it against the official numbers. The OECD sent us a database that we could use to track the doctors who were registered. And we discovered that most of the doctors who had left the country were never accounted for. because if they were not re-accredited to practice as physicians in their host countries, they vanished from sight. And then we had to get another piece of the story, and that's where Rosanna came in.
Thank you, Mark. في الحقيقة القصة لم تكن
Thank you. This was not an easy story to look for a homeland where doctors or physicians live, especially in Syria, and those who left to Europe but could not find a place to work. This was a painful story to look for those who can provide mercy, offer mercy to people, whereas they themselves need this kind of mercy in order to find their future. That is the European policies adopted at the time, and accepting the refugees prior to 2015 totally ignored all the expertise, including physicians who arrived in Europe. They were subject to discrimination. And this is what we found through the interviews we conducted with the policymakers and those who are responsible for these policies. They were discriminated against based on their nationality, whereas all the other refugees were able to access job opportunities, whereas thousands of Syrian refugees were outside this. They were discriminated against also based on their religion. And the journey did not stop there. We had in this story to look for plenty of sources. We tracked many of the open sources, and through the social media platforms, there had been actually treasures. I advise you, I recommend that to all of you look into that. There had been also the interviews that we conducted, and the secret clinics that were established due to such regimes in Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey. After that, we went to did research in the Damascus that is today witnessing a new organized immigration of physicians under the eyes or before the eyes of the official authorities to the European states such as Germany. So these secret medical clinics that we visited, it was difficult for us to get some pictures, to take some pictures of these clinics, but we had to use AI to take pictures or to try to gather pictures of these places. It started in 2019, followed by the corona, and there is a secret clinic in Turkey. We have our friend Muhsen, who has a story that we used. He's in this conference. We revisited in 2022 to make sure that this secret or confidential sector is still working. After I published the report or the investigation, it was very painful. This violation against Syrian physicians, they communicated with us from the Gulf states, from Sudan, also from Libya. And this was very painful because those physicians had to leave to their countries that already live conflicts, to other countries that also live or experience other conflicts. I can tell you today that there are families who wish the death for their relatives, especially when there are very difficult situations where you don't have specialized physicians who can work according to their specialties or fields. Today, we have 250 physicians in Syria in a sector that needs a lot of support. This is the story. We hope that there is a hope for these new immigrant physicians, but the journey is not done yet or not completed yet.
I will say just one thing quickly. When you pick a partner, don't just look at their skills, look at their character. Are these the kind of people you want to be spending the next 6 months of your life with, getting to know them? With Rosanna, the answer was yes.
شكرا لكما. قاد أندرو دوتفيلد فريق الذكاء الاصطناعي في فول تايم وطور تكنولوجيا لمكافحة المعلومات.
Led the investigation. They had a lot of tools that fact checkers can benefit from. Let's talk to Andrew. Also, Seja would give us what's the importance of adapting these tools so that they can become in the Arabic language.
مرحبا جميعا.
Welcome, everybody. I will give to Andrew to start. Actually, I'm here. I have a small surprise here.
Hi, my name is Andrew Dudfield. I'm the head of AI at a fact checker called Full Fact. I have some slides, but I do not have a clicker. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing at Full Fact. Thank you. Which one's next? This one, perfect, thank you. So Full Fact is a fact checker based in the UK. We've been going for about 14 years, and through that time we've seen a number of different things happen in the misinformation space. But for the last 4 years of those, I've been the head of AI at Full Fact, and I've been really lucky to be able to work with an amazing range of people to think about how technology can improve and help with parts of the fact-checking process. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. And I'm also delighted to be able to share the stage with my good friend Sarja, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we continue to work together. And I just wanted to say also to thank you to the organizers of this amazing event. I've been felt so welcome, and it's just so slick. Everything is amazing. Everything just works in the way that it should do. So well done, everybody, particularly those at the back doing all of the work here. It's much appreciated. So Full Fact has a key proposition that we think bad information ruins lives. It damages people's health, and it hurts democracy. So bad information is something that we're really keen to ensure that we have a good way of addressing. And the challenge with the bad information is that it keeps changing. And we see this in the 14 years that Full Fact has existed. We've gone from fact-checking the front pages of newspapers and the headlines of the TV to a huge range of information coming across the internet. Full Fact sees millions of things every day that it could potentially fact-check. And that's across social media, that's across newspaper websites, and that's across just different platforms that come and go all of the time. We have to learn about Gab and about Rumble and about fringe platforms where more and more content is being shared. And that means that we need to use technology to help us with this, because we're creating fact checks, and fact checks are really important. In fact, I think fact checks are some of the most important content in the world. We don't have very many of them. There's maybe less than 200,000 fact checks that have ever been written. So each one of them is incredibly precious. And we want to ensure that every one that is written about the most important topics, works as hard as it possibly can, and is seen by as many people as possible. And technology is a really important part of the way that we can tell that story. And so at Full Fact, we decided 5-6 years ago that we really needed to think about how we were going to use technology to help us with this. And AI was part of that picture for us. And we've been thinking about how can we build tools for fact checkers, and that is tools to help fact checkers. We don't want to automate the process of fact checking because fact checking is really hard. And journalists and fact checkers are very, very smart people who are very good at identifying the context, the caveats, the nuances that goes into fact checks. And technology is very good at bringing order to chaos, sorting through huge amounts of information and identifying the most important bits. So we've built some tools. They do 3 simple things. They identify what is the most important thing to fact check each day. That's looking at all of those millions of statements and try to identify the top 10, 20, 50, the small number of important things to help guide fact checkers. They also help us understand where people are repeating things that have previously been fact checked. To do this, it helps us understand the impact of our work. If we fact check something, do people stop talking about it? Can we start to identify narratives where people are constantly repeating things? And also, and importantly, how can we help fact checkers work faster? Fact checkers have such a hard job. So how can we use technology to make sure that we can transcribe content, we can digest content, we can just bring things together into one place and make that process simpler and easier for fact checkers around the world. And Full Fact has worked with a lot of different organizations. We've been doing work across different countries in Africa for a number of years now, working with partners across Europe and in Australia. And now I'm delighted to say that we're working with the Arab Fact Checking Network, of which Sarja is going to talk us a little bit about now.
Thank you so much, Andrew. يعني بال 2023 صرنا نحكي مع
Thank you so much, Andrew. Let's begin to talk about how our Arab fact checkers are trying to. We tried these tools for a time and we understood that's really important about live fact-checking. It helps us to identify what are the things that we should concentrate in fact-checking. After that, after testing, we took a time to work with a number of fact-checkers, and we emphasize that these tools are very important to us. We have a little surprise for you. Full fact سوف تتحدث اللغة العربية in 24 in the year 2024 we will announce tens of people are working with full fact to transform the software completely into Arabic to evaluate the data and convert it completely into Arabic. People will be trained, at least 20 fact-checking organizations will be trained to be used and will be provided completely free for these foundations. We wish that this cooperation will be fruitful. We hope to learn from everybody else with the continuous evaluation. We will develop these tools in the future more along with full fact, especially that you have, you know that Arabic language is highly complicated with AI. I think this is a useful experiment. I think next year for the next ARIJ forum, we will present the outcome of this experiment, how the fact checkers are benefiting from these tools. Andrew, what do you think? How do you imagine next year? How would fact checkers?
Okay.
I look very confused. Sorry.
Okay, I was just asking how you imagine after 1 year the Arab fact checkers working with AI and full fact tools.
Yeah, so I hope within a year that we will be able to see the impact of our work. We'll be able to see that we've helped people to work faster, help people to work smarter, and we hope to see that the impact of our work is addressing key narratives that we're seeing across different areas and through a huge range of partners as well, because we know that we're going to be working with people who are approaching this from very different starting points, and that we hope that we can ensure that the tools work elegantly with you and that we can learn as well, because this is a part of the world that we haven't worked in and we haven't partnered with people in. And we're just really delighted that we're getting to work with such exciting organizations who are approaching this in such a thoughtful and interesting way.
We also wish that these tools are important for other fact checkers in the Arabic area. Please raise your hands. I hope that these tools are beneficial for them and next year give us actual feedback about these tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Saja and Andrew. If you have any questions, please keep them and we will be able to answer them. Finally, we would ask ourselves, can we eliminate prejudice in news? Should us do that? We will be addressing these questions. We have Mariam Tabouk and Kevin Nguyen. Kevin and Marianne from the Artificial Intelligence Fellowship at the Media or Press Journalism School. They would be able to tell us or to speak to us about prejudice in news or news prejudice.
Sure.
Yeah, Kevin and I are reporters from ABC News, which is the largest media organisation in Australia. And for the last 6 months, we've been working with ARIJ and Deutsche Welle for a project about media bias, specifically looking at ways to weed out bias in pre-publication stories, so before they get out into the public, making sure the stories have no bias within them. But before we go into what we were doing in our project, it's important to look at what the history of bias is with AI. So Kevin?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for showing up. So right now, news organizations around the world are rightfully excited or concerned about particularly large language models or LLMs, and how they're going to impact the work that they do. So while AI systems can't yet all the tasks expected of a full-fledged person, so you and I, they can certainly excel and outperform humans in certain aspects. So as the industry evolves, a new branch of research is developing concurrently called AI alignment, which seeks to steer AI towards human goals to avoid unintended consequences and to instill moral values, or at least the machine equivalent of moral values, into AI. So when Marianne and I conceived the first iteration of our program earlier this year, we kept in mind from the beginning that the results of machine learning is only as good as the training data. So the anecdote that we were really fixated on, or me particularly, was somewhere around 2019, a machine learning tool which had analyzed a person's CV or their resume on behalf of a hiring company. When this tool was audited, it was revealed that the algorithm prioritize two factors in a person's resume to be indicative of high job performance. The first is if their name was Jared, and the second is if they played high school lacrosse. No doubt, there was a statistically significant correlation between CEOs and people who play a sport typically relegated to private boarding schools. But few in good faith could argue that these factors were useful. This is an example of where AI and machine learning fails to succeed. AI gives the person exactly what they want at the exclusion of other things. So the industry, to some extent, is already grappling with the problem of exclusion. So popular image generators that a lot of you may have known, such as DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, were found to overwhelmingly produce Caucasians when asked to generate generic people who were, for example, bankers. But when asked to produce things like homemakers or janitors, they were found to generate overwhelmingly images of women and people of color, respectively. So even before we started to, work on a project about, how do we identify and remove bias, we had to create a healthy data set to work with. So while previous researchers have considered the problem of bias, what we understand to be journalistic bias was somewhat different and a kind of unexpected problem we had to resolve. And Marianne can explain.
Yes. You have to excuse me for a second. I'm going to get a little bit technical, so I'm sorry. One research, while doing our research, we found that there were a handful of studies on AI and media bias, but those primarily looked at detecting political bias in media outlets and then identifying biased text spans. So what made our project different from these is we were proposing to rewrite biased text during article production and not just identifying it afterwards. So there's a baseline of articles and texts that contain bias called the wiki neutrality corpus, which we and those other research groups used to pre-train our AIs. So it's just a huge spreadsheet of paragraphs and article links of where bias appears in news articles. But again, we needed to take it to another level and begin creating our own data sets in English and in Arabic with thousands of human-written corrections. Those human correctors were professional journalists, editors, UN gender experts that looked at three key areas of baseline outputs. We're looking at grading the AI on a scale of 1 to 3, like a school teacher would, suggesting improvements and providing explanations. The rating looked at grammatical errors, whether the tone and style of the author remained, and if any key information in the article was changed. And then we rated the ratings. So with a Kappa score, we saw if the annotators agreed whether or not these were good results or whether they could be improved on. So some outputs got a big 0, like the one here that changed the sentence from closing the gender pay gap is not rocket science, and it changed it to just a ridiculous thing that said, the gender pay gap remains a significant issue in various industries and STEM fields. It's just not the author's intention, it removes the style, and it changed basic information of the sentence. So while it's clear that the AI models we used had figured out how to write, but what it couldn't figure out is how to write like a journalist. So it's our hope that with more time, we can generate tens of thousands of examples of corrected articles with professional explanations from experts in the field to have an AI that not only catches unconscious bias that would normally be published, but does it in a way that is indistinguishable from a human, moral, and ethical editor.
So look, what we just showed you is just one example of the attempt to rectify the foundational problems with working with AI. and it's kind of need to address going forward to ensure, as best as possible, that the technology is equitable. Some services, recognizing this problem, are adding hidden logit commands or kind of hidden little prompts in their generation processes. For example, sometimes ChatGTP might secretly add the word ethnically ambiguous into an image prompt to ensure both the output and the broader data being trained doesn't become skewed. However, for those who work in diversity spaces, they know simply being present isn't enough. And in our little time that's dwindling, there's a lot to address. But I'll just come back to the beginning of our talk, where I mentioned AI alignment and how it's about ensuring the development of technology is aligned with human goals. Our research and other researchers like us isn't going to solve racism, sexism, or political division. But if we in this room believe that journalism at its core is to the benefit of humanity, then journalistic values should be a constant in AI development going forward. Thank you.
I want to call everyone else to the stage. Andrew, Huda, Alaski, Saja, and Lejane, and Mark, and Hadir. إذا عندكم أي سؤال بإمكانكم
If you have any question, you can ask our speakers, our panelists. If you have any question, please raise your hand so that I can see you. Hello, my name is Kauthar. You mentioned that in 2024 about fact-checking in Arabic. In that case, we wouldn't see any bias by fact-checking in Arabic, because in English it was like very biased, because the people who built these platforms are foreigners. That's why we had bias. In Arabic, there will be no bias when we use these tools for fact-checking. Thank you. I will let Andrew answer, but I will quickly say they will use data in Arabic, and also they will fund the Arabic Foundation that provide the data for these tools. That will be not be translated, but please, Andrew.
Yeah, it's a great question and really important. So we use a collection of underlying very large models that have been trained in multiple languages. And so whilst they have been used in English in the first instance, they work in 150 languages, of which Arabic would be one. And then also we fine-tune them with additional annotations in Arabic. So the team will be providing us more information to help ensure that we can test the quality of these models and to make sure that they are working well in the languages we want. It is very challenging with all large language models to say that there is no bias in any information, because they are producing outputs based on inputs that are training data. And so the information that goes in has to be thought about very carefully. But my belief is that by providing some good information and some annotations in Arabic, so getting Arabic-speaking fact checkers to help us understand the inputs, we will achieve high-quality outputs.
Mike, the question is for you. Is it important to have a person working in international organizations who can perform transboundary investigations?
I'm not a member of an international organization. ARIJ is an international organization that is specialized in this region. So this was the region where the story mattered most. And this was the region to come looking for partners. So you don't necessarily have to be hooked up with an international news organization, but you do need to be able to connect to the people who care about the story and have the capability to carry the story through. And incidentally, I'd like to say thanks to the New Arab for having published the English language version of the story. You know, we had no problem publishing it in the Arab world, and Rosanna, of course, are publishers. But, you know, Syria has fallen off the news map. So if there were not publications out there that were telling the world about the Arab region in English, the English language version of the story might have sat in a drawer for months.
Thank you, Mark. وأيضا السؤال موجه لهدى وأندرو معا.
Also, the question for both Huda and Andrew together. Huda mentioned that transboundary collaboration doesn't mean that journalists should always depend on Arab journalists for the language boundaries, but they are treat them as peers, and they are equal in journalism. What are the qualities that a journalist would look for in a partner journalist to have a collateral investigation? Let me just translate because the question was really quick.
The question, Andy, is they mentioned how I said, like, you know, working with Western journalists, that it's not just about us, like, speaking Arabic, and they're asking about what criteria or what qualities are you looking for in a journalist if, you know, you want to work with them in an international cross-border collaboration?
That's a great question. The fundamental thing is that they're journalists and take that job very seriously. So when we talk about the rigor of fact-checking, I mean, I cannot tell you how many conversations that we had to get to the question about how do you know what we think we know? How can we prove it? If we're dealing with workers who are being trafficked, how can we verify their story? We had WhatsApp chats, photographs, we had contracts, we had visas, we had all sorts of documentation, travel documentation to verify every part of their story. And then we would go to Amazon, we would go to the Pentagon and say, we have all of these things documented. We did this weeks, if not months in advance, and say, can we prove all of this? But the journalists on the ground, to get back to your question, at ARIJ, and all of our collaborators, we had to verify everything. We had to have that tenacity of sticking to the facts and not getting defensive when another journalist says, how can we prove this? How do we really know this? And that quality, as well as just being open and communicative, were fundamental.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Hadir, there's one more question because we don't have a lot of time. Hadir, أنت كنت تشتغلي على التحقيقات أو المواضيع المتعلقة في البيئة والمناخ.
Questions about environment. We know that environment it's really recent that I work on in the Arab world. How important was it for the transborder collaboration to have environmental investigations precisely? You mean the transboundary cooperation between the Arabic and other languages? We are, of course, the people who are specialized in climate change are very limited in the Arabic. There are so many challenges in that regard. To begin with, we have not available resources or data base in Arabic language. There's another challenge about there's no foundations that are specialized in climate journalism. Finding other people who are willing to work in that subject was really difficult. And Arab journalists to work with other journalists to have their experience and may find other opportunities.
احنا هيك بنكون انهينا الجلسة اليوم.
With this, we finish this session. Thank you so much for your presence. Thank you so much for your presence in this session, and we would be meeting again in a session on the digital violence and challenges facing female journalists in the MENA region. Thank you so much for attending, and see you again.